trenches, gas masks, and endless mud. But the real shock? What soldiers ate just to survive. Forget the history books. This is a look at World War I like you've never seen it before. When World War I erupted in Europe in August 1914, the United States, under President Woodrow Wilson, chose to remain neutral. However, over the next several years, the U.S. found it increasingly difficult to stay uninvolved. German submarine attacks on civilian and merchant vessels, which killed 128 Americans, soured public opinion. Still, Wilson won re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war," and the U.S. continued to trade with the Allied powers while trying to maintain official neutrality. That changed in early 1917. Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare in the Atlantic, targeting ships without warning, including American ones. Outraged, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany, which it did on April 6, 1917. The United States had officially entered World War I on the side of the Allies. Once war was declared, the United States moved quickly to mobilize. The first U.S. troops arrived in France in June 1917 and built up its presence in Europe, eventually deploying more than 2 million troops to the Western Front, and those troops needed food. By the spring of 1918, American soldiers were heavily engaged in combat operations, and the logistics of feeding an army was a daunting task. Life in the trenches during the First World War was harsh, relentless, and often demoralizing. Days of boredom were broken only by moments of sheer terror. Poor sanitation, minimal rest, and constant exposure to the elements took a toll on both the bodies and minds of the men who served. And when it came to food, conditions were no better. Each soldier was issued a daily ration, though the contents varied by nation. In general, rations included canned meat, often bully beef, hard biscuits nicknamed hardtack or toothbreakers, tinned soups or stews, and preserved vegetables. To accompany these, soldiers might receive tea or coffee, sugar, salt, and occasionally small luxuries like jam or chocolate. Bread was a dietary staple, but getting it fresh in the front lines was rare. Most loaves had to be transported long distances and were often stale by the time they reached the trenches. In some cases, bread was replaced entirely by long-lasting alternatives like the aforementioned hardtack. When possible, soldiers cooked their own meals using small portable stoves, braziers, or mess tins. They'd mix together whatever rations they had, perhaps some meat, vegetables, and water, into a rough stew. It wasn't gourmet, but a hot meal was a small comfort in the cold, wet, and muddy conditions of trench life. In some cases, soldiers would raid farms, stealing chickens or even pigs, and although rare, some troops would catch rats and add the small amount of meat to a stew. For a soldier to cook a meal in the trenches, first he would dig out a shallow slot at the base of his trench where he can safely light a small fire. If planning to make a corned beef stew, using his jackknife, he begins chopping the vegetables, which he requisitioned from a small farm nearby. As usual, it's going to be an all-in-one stew, the typical trench meal. He will cut everything into small, easy-to-cook pieces, and add it all into the mess tin. The corned beef is cubed, which will also add a bit of fat, helping meld the meal together. The stew is constantly stirred to prevent sticking or burning. Water is slowly added to make a thick, satisfying meal. One of the few bright spots for many soldiers was receiving care packages from family and friends back home. These parcels might include homemade cakes or biscuits, tins of sweets, tobacco, socks, and other small comforts. In an environment of deprivation, these gifts were more than just food, they were a morale booster. Food supply was not always consistent, particularly in active combat zones. Intense shelling, disrupted supply lines, or harsh weather could leave troops underfed. Many went hungry for days or survived on cold, repetitive meals that barely covered their caloric needs. On November 11, 1918, Germany signed an armistice, and the guns of World War I finally fell silent at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. By then, the United States had suffered over 116,000 deaths and more than 200,000 wounded. Though American forces were in the war for only a short time compared to the European powers, their involvement played a decisive role in tipping the balance. In the end, food in the trenches was a matter of survival, not enjoyment. While soldiers made the best of what they had, the conditions were far from ideal. Hunger, like mud and fear, was simply part of life on the front lines. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to Food Folklore for more content like this.